Okay, here we are at the All Ages Record Shop here in Camden.
Yeah.
Just in a great little acoustic set from Gary Lammin.
Thank you.
In promotion of your new solo album.
Yeah, what I've done today was to play the songs to the people who turned up here in All Ages Records, how I first presented them to Dave Goodman. If you hear the album, you'll hear that the songs are basically the same structure and the same arrangement as when I first showed them to Dave. But what Dave done with them, he was to put them onto a really kind of, as you can hear, trippy sort of esoterical themed ambience, and I think works very, very well with the songs.
I was like, it's quite a different approach for you, really. You know, from your normal band, Bermondsey Joyriders, it's just totally something different.
Yeah,
it goes like 60s.
I can take a breath in between lines on this particular recording.
It's like you're exploring like 60s psychedelia and trippy blues kind of thing.
Yeah.
Tell us more about Dave Goodman, because he produced it, and sadly no longer with us, but his history goes back to the early days of Sex Pistols. And
I think that Dave's involvement with the Sex Pistols was of far more value than anybody gives that credit for. He knew about sound, without a doubt. Steve Jones using a MXR phaser, I don't think that would have been his first choice of effects pedal. That was pure Dave Goodman. And I got to know Dave very well, and I know that he put on a brave face when he was kind of elbowed out of the situation when Malcolm signed Pistols to EMI, and they had to go for the house producer of Chris Thomas. Dave put on a brave face. He tried to shrug it off and laugh it off, but I think it really hurt him. I think it really affected him. He considers them. He still considered them to be his mates, but he'd been left out of the gang, and I could feel how that had affected him.
obviously, he produced all the early demos, which basically led them to...
The interesting thing is when the heads of the EMI and the A&R department played those demos to Chris Thomas, he's down on record as saying, no, and what do you want me to do with these? These sound great. I don't think I can improve on that. And if you want me to re-record these, I'm going to do it exactly the same. So, you know, maybe it was a political thing that, you know, the Pistols could only get that deal with EMI if they used their house producer, because in those days, record companies were very much up on pushing their house producer onto a situation, because if they had a hit record, then all of a sudden they've not only just got a hit record, and our producer is available as well, by the way, who's under contract to us, you know, so that kind of political
And you just mentioned Malcolm McLaren. There's actually Malcolm McLaren introduced you to Dave, I believe.
I was going over to Malcolm's shop in the King's Road because, I mean, this was in the days before the internet, of course.
Yeah.
Before the days of mobile phones.
It's all word of mouth.
You know, if you wanted to get a message to someone, it was either telephone or you sent a smoke signal. You know, so I'd go over to the shop on the hope that I was going to catch Malcolm in there. Incidentally, how I first heard about Malcolm McLaren, as I say, this was in the days before internet and mobile phones. I was a big New York. The three bands that I loved was the Rolling Stones, the Faces, the New York Dolls, and following very close onto them was Slade and T-Rex. I love that street.
Which we hear totally in your music.
Thank you very much. That street rock and roll thing was, for me, what it was all about. And I knew who Malcolm McLaren was because I was a New York Dolls fan, and I knew that he managed them at the end of their career and tried to rescue their career. I think it was a little bit too late by then. And I read in the back of the New Musical Express. Now, in those days, the New Music Express really was the Bible of underground rock and roll. Okay, sounds had its merits, as did the Melody Maker. But if you were serious about underground rock and roll, the New Musical Express was the paper for you. And at the end, and at the back of the New Musical Express, they had this kind of sort of PS postscript edition to bits of news that was coming in. It was called Teasers, and they had these two little spiders who were mates, and the idea behind the cartoon of these little spiders is that they'd jumped in the inkwell, and they, with their spidery inky legs, they managed to get this last little bit of bit of information in, and it was very, very humorous. And I read that Malcolm McLaren, formerly manager of the New York Dolls, was now managing a band that was going to rival the Who or the Stones for street political importance. And I thought, no, that's got to be me. So I started going over to see Malcolm, and I sort of went over there several times with not much correspondence, except one day he called me on the telephone. I'd left a tape, a cassette, and he said, "You've got something here with these songs. I want you to go and see Dave Goodman." And I went down to a gig. Dave used to run a PA company as well, and Malcolm said he'd be at this venue doing his PA. Go down and see him. So I did. It was probably not the best time to speak to someone about how important you thought your songs were when they're trying to lug in a dirty, great big PA. And looking back on it, it weren't a very diplomatic way that I approached Dave. And he kind of got the ump with me a little bit, and I got the ump with him. And at some point in time, whilst I'm going on about how important my street rock and roll songs were, he pulled out of his bag a Tibetan flute and started playing it. And he was just totally mocking me.
Which is going to be heard on this album, I believe.
Which is on this album. Because fast forward, after that rather unrewarding meeting with Dave, I get a phone call from someone saying that they needed to get somebody to come and play slide guitar for them, which, I kind of specialise in. And I said, yeah, sure. I said, what's your situation? You signed, or it's DIY? I said, okay, well, we'll sort out a price on the day. I'll come over and let's see what happens. Maybe a bottle of wine, a couple of sandwiches, something like that, as it usually was in them days. And they said, yeah, well, here's the address. It's, Whiteley Road, Gypsy Hill, South East London, Mandala Studios. I said, yeah, okay. None of that actually meant anything to me. And I went, yeah, who's producing? Oh, Dave Goodman. They must have picked up on my silence, because I sort of went gulp. You all right with that? I went, yeah, is that Dave Goodman, the original Sex Pistol? Yeah, the very, very same. I said, oh, okay. Then they went, you all right? And that I went, yeah, no problem whatsoever. I think to myself, oh, crikey. I was really rude to him. I didn't roll with his sort of mocking of, and he was always like a very fun, clowning sort of guy. I bit on it, got angry, and thought, oh no, I've got to go back and face this guy. I tell you what, when I knocked on that door, I'm thinking to myself, I'm looking down like that, and as I looked up, he opened the door and he was playing that same Tibetan flute. and I burst out. Like I was into a bit of a smoke those days, and I saw that, and I could see the look in his eyes, and I just burst out laughing. He went, "Now you've got it. Now we can do some business." So we became sort of mates after that.
And I say this is a new album, but let's go way back to 2000. You started recording this.
I had three vocal tracks to finish. No, actually, I had two. But I replaced one, and the reason I replaced one of the tracks was I'd written a tribute song to John Sinclair of the MC5, and then I actually bumped into him and started working with him, and I thought to myself, well, okay, well, if I'm thinking of finishing two vocal tracks, I wonder if what would Dave say? He would have probably said, well, you could get John Sinclair on your album and sing on a tribute song. Go for it. So I did, and so there was three vocal tracks that I had to finish, because unfortunately, as Kathy, his lady, said that Dave's going to operate on a different frequency now, man.
And I believe it was Dave who sort of pushed the envelope out for you, kind of thing, to think out of the punk rock spectrum.
Yeah,
punk rock isn't necessarily just.
I mean, he made me realise that you didn't have to have this burning, searing, blistering street rock and roll to have a credible political statement. I mean, you can hear this now. And when I first played these songs to Dave, and he said to me, well, I want to try and utilise them as if we're actually rewriting some of the music for the film performance, and also maybe let's imagine we're rewriting some of the tracks on Satanic Majesty's Request. I'm thinking to myself, well, I know this stuff really well, but again, he's actually doing what he done to me when I first met him, he's not going to turn these songs into driving rock and roll for me. But this time, I was clever enough to go along with it, and you know, how else could I? After he remembered me by answering the door with that flute, I really got where he was at then.
Well, so for those who haven't heard the album yet, you say there's Tibetan flute on it. What else can we expect to hear from the album?
What, from Dave?
Well, just generally.
Well, Dave plays bass and drums on most of the tracks. I think I might have played bass on one of the tracks. He played tabla, you know, the Indian drum. He played sitar. He played some synthesizer. But did I say synthesizer? No, he raised that. There's no synthesizer on this album, honestly. There's a little bit of synthesizer. A little bit. And the albums, as you can hear, Dave was very much into the esoterical. He was very much into alternative realities and perceptions. I already had a slight interest in that, but it was Dave that kind of took me further into it, and he actually explained to me that this is just phenomena that can't be registered by any kind of machine. These are natural occurring phenomena that you pick up through your heart and through your mind.
Marvellous. And I say the album's been like 17 years in the making altogether.
When Dave died, I just thought to myself, okay.
He passed away 2005, I believe.
Yeah. A great loss. I actually. An involuntary thought went through my mind at that point in time. Well, that's that. Then it's not worth recording anything more ever again. I began to realise how very fortunate I was to be in a studio with Dave Goodman after about the third day. After I allowed my last little bit of clinging on egotism to slip away, I suddenly realised that I was.
So when did you finally get the wake-up call to resurrect this album?
I would listen to it every now and again just to remember the fun that I had with making it with Dave, and sometimes it takes me a long time to click with things. I've known Matt Sargent for 250 million years, and Matt Sargent runs the Dave Goodman tribute page. And I thought, do you know what? Why don't I play this to Matt and see what he thinks about it? And I took it over to him, and he played the album. His mobile phone went at one point in time, and he went, "I'll call you back." And he was really listening to this album. And after it finished, he just looked at me and he went, "Gary, what on earth is stopping you from releasing this album?" And I said, "Well, there's a couple of tracks on it that weren't finished." He went, "What? And you're going to deny what is possibly one of Dave's greatest productions getting out there to the people because there's 2 tracks that wasn't finished?" He went, "You need to think again. Finish the tracks, go and get it mastered and release it." I still wasn't totally comfortable with that, but I thought about it probably more seriously than I'd ever thought about it in terms of releasing it. And I phoned Matt up and said, "Okay, look, if we can get in contact with Kathy, Dave's lady, who's now living in Malta, which is where Dave passed on. If we can get a copy of it to Kathy, and if we can get a good reaction from Kathy, you know, I'll release it."
And you finished the album with Alan Clayton from Dirty Strangers?
They were the two of the tracks that I had to finish with Alan Clayton. I thought he was kind of in the zone of the situation, and I knew
sort of similar backgrounds.
Similar backgrounds, and I didn't want to go to a The great thing about Dave Goodman's studio, it wasn't a commercial studio. You couldn't phone up and book Dave Goodman's studio. You could only get to record in Dave's studio if somebody else had recorded there, and they told Dave about you, and he might invite you round, and you know, I've seen people would have to go over there for 2 or 3 times to sit down and break bread with him, eat Kathy's lovely Victorian vegetarian meals that she had, all these fabulous Victorian menus that she used to make them from, and it wasn't a commercial studio, so Dave only really wanted to work with people that he thought he would gel with, and although I paid him for the recordings, I didn't pay for them all, because sometimes he would phone me up on a Saturday morning, maybe like sort of 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning, and, you know, sort of in those days I was still smoking and drinking. And Gary, come over. There's a cancellation. Really? He went, just come over. It's not going to cost you anything. All right, okay. Yeah. And I'd go over there and record. You know, so I was very, very fortunate, really. And today we just seen you do like 4 or 5 acoustic numbers. What was he? We've got plans to take this on the road with a full band? I suppose I could. I mean, I'm mindful that I can't really market it as driving hard Friday night, Saturday night. We've all just finished work, let's have a good beer and a tear up kind of rock and roll. But I think with the right venues, with an understanding of how the album, I think I've got to get a few more of the albums out there so people know what's going on, which will enable me to present something that has got still a street message to it, in a slightly different guise other than hard driving rock and roll. And do you see this direction as a one-off album, or would you like to work again in this direction? That's an interesting question. It's definitely something that's helped me, to be quite honest, in viewing what I do with the Bermondsey Joyriders. I think it's brought some fresh air into my thinking. Actually made you realise that even with the Bermondsey Joyriders, you don't necessarily have to be in that one limit, you know. I think the Bermondsey Joyriders have to be in they're too full on, too bonkers, you know. We really are a full on driving. We just got a new drummer in, Steve Granger, fantastic drummer. You know, knows how to play that real hard driving rock and roll. And after a couple of rehearsals, I said to him, "How you enjoying it?" He said, "Yeah, I'm enjoying it." He said, "Man, but is it full on?" I said, "Oh, that's nice to hear." I said, "Because you played in some really powerful things." He went, "Man, this is full on, believe me." Plus, I just mentioned just now that you could go out and tour this album. There's a possibility that you could be your own support act. Would that work or not? Have you ever thought about being a manager? I need a manager at the moment. Yeah, that's a good idea. Well done. Yeah, let's get on the phone right now. You know, catch them when I'm sober. Yeah, good. Yeah, I like the idea. Yeah, I'll go on first. Yeah. And of course, the Bermondsey Joyriders are still an ongoing concern. Yeah, we've just got Gary Pearce coming on bass. Gary is usually found playing guitar for Honest John, the Boys, and he's a guitarist. But what I've been really pleasantly surprised with Gary is he doesn't sound like a guitarist playing bass. He actually sounds like a bass player, and that's a very difficult thing to achieve, because when you are a guitarist that's been playing for several years, you think you hear what bass players do, and you think, "Oh, I can do that." But no, that's not really where it's at. You've got to make it. It's like when you make a pot and you decide that pot's now going to become a mug. You can't just stick the handle on it. You've got to blend the handle in. You know what I mean? And I think that's what Gary's been very good at with the Bermondsey Joyriders. He's blended in a very authentic bass style for the band, and him and Steve, the drummer, Steve Granger, seem to be really working well. Right. And that's why I've seen Joyriders a few times. Great live band. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah. Well, you wait till you see us now. It's blistering now.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay, it's been great talking to you.
Thank you.
There's
very
the
much.
album. You want to hold it up? Show everybody.
Okay. Yeah.
Your bottom was titled debut solo album.
Yeah. Gary Guitar Lammin, produced by Dave Goodman, and according to Mick Jones, a very interesting and different album.
And it is. It's been getting great reviews everywhere.
Thank you very much indeed. Cheers.
Buy it online everywhere, and even here at this record shop.
Thank you very much. All Ages Records, yeah.
Yep, excellent.
Thanks very much for talking to me.
All the best for you,
Thank
Gary.
You, man.
All the best. Cheers. Thank you.